This program airs statewide on California Public Television and is a California's Gold classic. This series is endorsed by the California Teachers Association, the California School Boards Association, and the California Library Association. Hi, I'm Huell, and right now we're at the south gate of Vandenberg Air Force Base near the pleasant little community of Lompoc on the central coast of California. Now we're here in Lompoc for the next couple of days to see some of the sights. We're here at Vandenberg Air Force Base to visit one of the most historic and dangerous spots in the entire state of California. In fact, most people consider this spot to be the most dangerous place on the entire Pacific coast. Most people avoid this place, but we're going there because it should be quite an adventure. And as always, you're invited to come along on this adventure as we continue our search together for California's gold and visit Devil's Jaw. Now to get there, we had to drive about 7 miles inside Vandenberg Air Force Base, a huge facility that's been in operation since 1957, where they test missiles and launch satellites. We weren't allowed to photograph any of the launch sites, because I guess there's still some secret stuff going on. But the base covers over 98,000 acres, much of it in beautiful wilderness, and much of it in coastline. And it was here, on the coast, that we reached our destination and got our first look at Devil's Jaw. Now this whole section of the California coast is rough. Lots of churning water and jagged rocks seem to be everywhere. But this exact spot holds the distinction of being the most dangerous. In fact, it's not just called Devil's Jaw. It's also known as the Graveyard of the Pacific, and for good reason, too. 'Cause you see, over the years, literally hundreds of ships, large and small alike, have run aground and sunk in these waters. Some say as many as 400. But on a foggy night in 1923, something happened here that still is almost impossible to believe. Now, how could something of this magnitude, how could a disaster of this magnitude happen?
Well, it started when the destroyers, 14 destroyers, were headed from San Francisco to their home port in San Diego. They were instructed to be in 3 columns following each other about 150 yards from bow to stern from each ship. They were using in those days a navigation system called dead reckoning. Basically, it wasn't very accurate. The captain at that time thought he was further out west, out to sea than he actually was, and he also thought that he had turned the corner around these rocks. But in fact, he was actually north of the rocks and much closer to shore than he really was. And consequently, it was a pitch black night.
And a foggy night.
And a foggy night. Tides were pretty rough like they are here, and the first ship ended up on the rocks, and the other ships being so closely behind, 7 all told ended up on the rocks.
So it was just kind of a chain reaction. They all followed each other right into the rock.
Exactly. Fortunately, the 7 remaining ships heard what was going on, and they were able to steer clear and head out to the west, and they were saved.
Now, was this a scandal at the time?
Well, for the first few days, the Navy tried to keep it a secret, but reporters and word got out, and it eventually was reported in the papers, and a court-martial was held.
It was definitely big news, and it still ranks as one of the worst peacetime disasters in American naval history. And when you think about it, it's remarkable that only 23 sailors lost their lives. Those huge destroyers thrown around in the water and on the rocks like they were toy boats. These amazing photographs give us some sense of what the disaster looked like. But many local citizens from Lompoc actually came out to Devil's Jaw to help in the rescue operations. And they saw the whole thing firsthand. Were the ships all out here?
There was only one in here, two out there, and the rest of them around the corner here.
Uh-huh.
There was men all over them rocks, just like a bunch of birds, hanging on.
Hanging on.
Hanging on, yes. They could. There was two ships there, and they were broke. And they had climbed up on there, but every wave was going over them.
Where you see the white water here now, at that time, it was just covered with a big, thick layer of foam, oil foam. Just like your white foam, only it's all oil. And it looked like the Dickens.
The bow of one of these boats that was sticking up out of the water, we could hear this banging inside. And then all of a sudden a hole started to appear. And he was a cook, and he took a fire axe, and them things were only 1/8 of an inch thick. He cut a hole, and they throwed shot a line across the ship. And then they got a bigger line to him, but every time a wave went over, he was in water going into that hole. But pretty soon he got it opened up, and out he come, and they pulled him in. And he was a Filipino cook.
So they were still rescuing people when you got here?
Oh my God. They had they had gotten ropes off of some of the ships and made ladders out of them and hung them down over the edges, and they were all covered with tar, and the guys would get halfway up and slip down. They couldn't hang on to nothing. It was so greasy. It was terrible. It's like Ed said, it was terrible.
Here we go. Another amazing part of this story is that even though the 7 destroyers ran aground and sunk almost 70 years ago, you can still see part of the wreckage, both out in the water and lodged in the rocks right down on the beach. And what better person to take me down to see all this than Alex Kirkish, the archaeologist at Vandenberg. Boy, we are right down in it.
Yep, we are.
Look at this. Now, is this part of the
wreckage?
This is part of the wreckage?
Yeah. Some right over there, piece here, and another piece beyond it.
Oh, look!
Yep.
That's a huge...
It's hard to tell from what ship it came from. Now the surf kind of tumbles the stuff around, and there was a lot of salvage operations going on afterwards. A lot of the stuff got dragged around.
The power of those waves, you can just feel it. Look out there. Now, it's one thing to look at Devil's Jaw from shore. It's another thing to go out in it. And that's exactly where we ended up, hitching a ride with Carol McComb, Rich Stroud, and Tony Bauer, all members of the Lompoc Dive Club. Now, the only place we could even put in was at Gaviota State Pier, and that was about a 30-mile trip up to Devil's Jaw, a trip that took us by some beautiful rugged coastline and past Point Conception with its famous old lighthouse built in 1890. Once we got past Point Conception, even though it was a calm day, as we approached the area, the sea got a little rougher. We had arrived at Devil's Jaw. Now, Carol, you've brought your boat out here quite a bit. Is this known by boaters as a really dangerous place?
Yeah, you don't want to be here unless it's, extremely calm, and you got to look into the forecast of what's coming up, because, weather will change, the sea will change in 15 minutes, and you'll be a nightmare within 15 minutes.
Now, what do you mean a nightmare?
You'll be taking green water over the bow, be coming on you.
And as we pulled up and stopped right here, you were looking at
at the graft.
At the graft that shows they're rocks,
yeah,
jagged rocks.
Yeah, there was like a 40-foot pinnacle just come straight up on us that we went over on that with the graft.
So is that the problem too, that they're jagged rocks that people that experienced boaters wouldn't even know about?
Right. Yeah, there's a couple places right along the coast there where we've seen before, like you never see a rock there before, and you go back and all of a sudden you see water swirling around,
and you can see a rock there that we didn't even know was there.
Wow. This is where some of the destroyers ran aground, right here.
Right.
Right on these big ones.
Yeah, that's the spot.
You notice how big the swell looks right here, and compare that to how flat it was before we came around the point. So you can imagine on a rough day how bad it could get here.
And they just didn't have any idea what they were getting into. They couldn't even see any of those rocks.
They thought they were mid-channel. They thought they were halfway to San Miguel, and
they weren't.
They were about 20 miles shy of where they wanted to make their turn.
To be honest with you, I'm a little disappointed that it's such a nice day, because for the story I was hoping that it would be a little bit more treacherous and have a little bit more suspense to it.
Yeah. Well, that all sounds like a good idea, but if it was any worse than this, we wouldn't want to be here.
Really?
Yeah, there's just too much risk. It looks nice right now, but in 15 minutes, we could be in big trouble. Like right now, we're starting to see some white caps here, and when you start seeing white caps, it's time to start thinking about heading back to Gaviota. And
really?
Get away from this west coast, get around on the south coast.
And the wind's coming up.
Yeah.
It's picked up a lot in just the last 5 minutes.
And the swells are getting bigger.
Right, and in fact, there's a pretty big one outside there coming right now.
So it's time for us to go home.
Yeah, I'd recommend that we start heading home.
We'll leave Devil's Jaw behind and get back to safety of land.
Yeah, right, it's time to get out of here.
So as the wind and the waves began to build, we hightailed it out of Devil's Jaw. Now, we got out of there safely, but over the years, literally hundreds of ships, including those 7 naval destroyers back in 1923, weren't so lucky. Now, Lompoc itself is a pleasant little town, hidden in a peaceful valley and removed from the main highways. It's also a town full of history and neat old buildings, like this church, which was built way before the turn of the century, or this wonderful old Carnegie Library, which now serves as the Lompoc Museum, or this beautifully restored old home, which is now a living museum run by the Lompoc Valley Historical Society. And how about this tree-lined street, which just happens to be the largest stand of Italian stone pines outside of Europe? Lompoc is also the flower seed capital of the world. Hundreds of acres of flowers. In fact, each June they have the Lompoc Valley Flower Festival, complete with tours of the flower fields, and a big floral parade, complete with floats, kind of like a mini rose parade. Now, the flower fields are beautiful, but there's something else in Lompoc that is truly a treasure. Purisima Mission, originally built in the late 1700s, is the 11th of a chain of missions that stretched from San Diego to Sonoma. Now a California State Historic Park, it's the state's most fully restored mission, a real jewel. And it's surrounded by over 900 acres of undeveloped land. So it's possible to visit here, look all around you, and really feel like you've gone back in time. Now, La Purisima hasn't always looked so good. Way back in the 1830s, the buildings began to fall into ruin. And by the 1930s, the place was in total ruin. There was almost nothing left. But in 1934, the Civilian Conservation Corps stepped in and began the immense job of reconstruction and restoration. Over 200 men worked on this project, and in 1941, on the eve of the 154th anniversary of its original founding, it was completed and opened to the public as a state park for everyone to enjoy.
Oh, you ready?
And recently, some of those original CCC workers came back to La Purisima to celebrate the 50th year of its restoration. It was a time for speeches, for certificates to be handed out, for an official anniversary cake to be cut, and most importantly, for these men to reminisce about the experiences they had while working to restore this proud and beautiful old mission.
I started out making adobe bricks, then making roof tile, finally ended up in the motor pool as a mechanic. And
So you did a little bit of everything.
a little bit of I think everybody did.
Did you know anything about making bricks before you got
Not
here?
a thing. I had no idea whatsoever. I had no idea about making roof tile, but I learned a lot.
Well, you did a pretty good job because it's still up there.
But the trouble was, Huell, when I went out looking for a job, I thought I'd walk into a tile place and ask for a job. And they said, making tile by hand? You're crazy. So I didn't get a job.
Was it work? Was it hard work?
Well, listen, the first week, I mean, you had blisters from the shovels, from building dams, soil conservation, using the hoe, cutting timbers.
Well, you were a city boy. This must have been something for you.
Oh, I was a city boy. Right out of high school. Yeah.
And loved it.
Oh, it was great.
I think it was a matter of training. And once we were taught how to do these different things, then we just fell into it. And this is a result.
Did anybody know what they were doing when they got here?
Not in my opinion, because most of us were young. I was 16 years of age when I arrived here. And like Bob, it was all strange, it was all new. And we were apprehensive about what was going to take place because we were so young and gullible. But we soon got used to the routine here. And I think basically it was because here they use what I call the ROD principle, okay? ROD meaning responsibility, obedience, and discipline. This was something that was imposed on us by retired Army officers, and it was a great help to us when we went into the military. It's something we never forgot. So the ingredients for the making of a good citizen started right here.
Is this close to the way you all did it?
It's close.
It's close. We just dug a hole and poured water in it, added the sawdust and the dirt.
Did you know anything about making the...
No, but you learn fast.
Now, what's that he's putting in it?
That's pine needle stuff, rather.
So he would put straw and pine needles in there.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
the binder.
Bind it together.
That's the binder.
Well, just what the Indians would do.
So this was really the authentic way of
Making
doing
bricks.
it.
That's the only way they had. Yeah. Wasn't any other make adobe bricks. You couldn't make them any other way.
Well, whatever you did it right because look.
Yeah, that's right.
We did a great job, didn't
The end result.
It's still standing.
The end result. Yeah.
Now, what kind of memories does this bring back for you watching this?
Well, I think I don't know. It makes me want to not do it again.
Well, you got to be proud, you know. And I can go through and I can see things that I actually put my hands on. I actually took a chisel to, or there's a couple chairs down there that I wove the bottoms to because I figured out how to do it.
Well, did you build it to last when you built it?
Well, I hope it's here for my grandchildren. They have when I tell them about the mission, they say, "Grandpa, we didn't know that you were that old."
Now, are there any questions? Shall we move on?
Now, since La Purisima Mission has been restored, it's become a favorite place for fourth graders from all over the state to visit when they're studying California history. I mean, what better place to find out firsthand what mission life was like in the early 1800s.
Every man would have had only the area from this red line to the next red line. Every man had a number, and his possessions would have to stay between this red line and that red line. You notice that, remember I told you that they traded hides? Notice their shield is of a hide, their gun holders hide. Everything that they could make out of hide, they made out of hide. This would be horsehair, but every man would only have this much room and one box. Now, as we walk down, I want you to notice that the bricks are dark at this end, and as you walk down the other way, you will notice they change from the dark bricks to a lighter brick. This dark area is where the walls had fallen in on top of it. These bricks are the bricks that were laid by the Indians back in the 1800s. It changes right here, and the Civilian Conservation Corps had to finish out the church all the way down to the altar. You have to realize there was no system of communication here, but the bells were the life of this mission. Now, the bells at this mission had certain cadence that they would play that would bring people to Mass. They brought the people to lunch. They brought the people in out of the fields. And then, of course, they would have some type of a cadence in case of emergency. And so what we're going to do is go up to the bell towers, and I'm going to have 2 children ring the bells. Now, you will see in the bell tower that there are 2 bells that were made in Peru. Now, I want you to ring yours once, and you come and ring yours twice. Ring it one way and let it go back the other way, all right? Okay. And then you ring yours once, and you ring yours twice, all right? Go right ahead.
Did you know much about missions before you came here today?
No, because this is my first time I've been to a mission.
Really? And what do you think after you've been here?
I think missions are really neat.
Do you think when they get through with the tour, they have a pretty good understanding of what life was like at this mission back then?
I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do. In fact, I use a little thing about where when we cross that bridge, we're going to be time warping back into 1820. And I always know when I've had a good tour, because when I get around to the end and I thank them for coming and I say, now we're about ready to time warp back into 1992, when I get a lot of moans and groans, I know I've had a good tour.
Do you find the kids remember a lot of the things they learn?
They remember a lot more from doing this than from reading it in a book. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's really valuable. They'll tell us things that we won't even remember the docent saying, and they'll teach us. So it's really, yeah, it's really neat.
So year after year, this trip is a real high point for you.
This is always a part of the 4th grade curriculum, isn't it? Anybody that can travel, I think, to La Purisima in this area incorporates that into their social studies unit.
Mm-hmm. Is this a high point for you every year?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. That's the reason I teach 4th grade.
A little over 50 years ago, it was only a pile of rubble. But today, it's a beautifully restored mission. La Purisima is one of our state treasures that, when visited, takes you back in time. Well, we end this particular program here with Ranger Steve Jones, who is usually based here at La Purisima State Park at the mission. You're not usually dressed like this.
No, usually I'm in uniform, yeah.
But he has agreed to end our program tonight by performing a very special musical number.
Yeah, it's called El Charro, and it's about punching cattle around here and falling in love and several other things.
Now, this would be a song that would be of the period when the mission was at its height, back in the early 1800s, right?
That's correct. This will be a popular folk song of the time, of that time period.
And I must say that you are a little bit nervous about this.
Yes, this is the first time I've performed this particular piece solo. So, yeah, it'll be an experience.
And your Spanish is not perfect.
No, but I'm working on it.
So this is either going to be the beginning of a new singing career for you or the ending of your career in the state park system.
One could say that, yes. Yes.
Okay, well, good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you again for your hospitality. We have really enjoyed ourselves.
I'm glad. It's been a pleasure having you.
Okay, here we go.
Estaba un charro sentado en las trancas de un corral. Estaba un charro sentado en las trancas de un corral. Su mayordomo le dice, no estés triste, Nicolás. Su mayordomo le dice, no estés triste, Nicolás. Necesito buen caballo, buena silla y buen gabán. Necesito buen caballo, buena silla y buen gabán. Su mayordomo le dice dice lo que gustes, Nicolás. Su mayordomo le dice lo que gustes, Nicolás. Esa chica que usted tiene, con ella me he de casar. Esa chica que usted tiene, con ella me he de casar. Su mayordomo le dice, tiene dueño Nicolás. Su mayordomo le dice, tiene dueño Nicolás.
Well, hello everybody, I'm Huell Hauser, and I sure hope you enjoyed this adventure. If you'd like to see it again or share it with your family or friends, or perhaps donate a copy to your local school or library, it's available on video cassette and on DVD. All you have to do is call 1-800-266-5727 and we'll be glad to send it to you right away.